This story that I'm going to tell was told to me by my grandmother years ago. She told me of the story of what we nowadays in English call the Ish people. She said a long time ago there was an old man, leader of the village. He went up to the mountain. High in the mountain he had a vision. And he came back to our village and he told the people of his vision. And the older people and traditional people, they all followed him. The older people, they followed him up to the mountain. His vision was to take all of his people high in the mountain. He brought them all the way up to what is now known to this day as Wells Creek. There on top of Wells Creek was the largest of all the cedar trees. Huge, huge old growth. The grandfather of the trees. He told his people, he said, we have to cut down this giant tree. And from this giant tree, we'll make a huge, huge canoe. These people said, okay, but before I fall it, he said, I want all the women to strip it of its bark. And we'll make it into big slabs, flat slabs of bark. So everybody got busy and they started pulling the bark off the giant tree. They took and they stacked it on top of one another and then they put big rocks on it, make it flat. Huge pieces of bark off this giant tree. Then all the men got busy and they started chopping and they felled this huge tree. When the tree fell down, the old man took and he made his measurements. He started making a huge wading canoe. The young people from the village, they came up and they laughed and they said, you folks are foolish. How do you propose to get this giant canoe off this mountain? You're miles and miles from the salt water. We ain't going to participate in this nonsense. So the young people, they come on back down to the village, and the older people stayed up there, and the traditional people. And they worked and worked and worked on this giant canoe. They were getting it done and getting it shaped. They had just finishing work to do, and the old man told all the men, you guys go off and get some other trees and make regular size whaling canoes. So they all went off different directions. They all made whaling canoes. When they got them done, they took the cedar and they stripped it and made long ropes, tied the whaling canoes to the back end of the big giant canoe. He told the women, he said, you guys smoke salmon, make watertight baskets and put it in the canoe. So they got busy and they smoked the salmon. They gathered basket material and they made watertight baskets. They gathered all this stuff and they brought it and they put it in the canoe. The old man, he went down the watering hole where all the animals go and drink. He took the magic powder from his medicine bag and he took that powder and he put it in the watering hole. The animals all come to drink. As they were drinking the water, they laid down and went to sleep. When all the animals were sleeping all around the pond, the old man went there and he gathered two of every kind. And he brought them to his big canoe and he put them in. Then he took and he put magic dust on the other ones, woke them back up. He kept the ones asleep in the big canoe. After the canoe was all done, then he took all those layers of bark that they had stripped right at the beginning and they put it over the top of the canoe and made a big roof over the canoe. The young people kept coming up every once in a while and they'd laugh at the people building this big canoe up on top of the mountain. Oh, you guys are foolish. You're really foolish making this huge, huge canoe up here. You'll never be able to get it down from up here. Oh, you guys are crazy. The old man, he sat down with his drum and he prayed to the grandfather sky. And he took his drum and he started singing and he gathered his people. He said, we've done all we can do here. Now climb into the canoe. Everybody in the village climbed up a big ladder and they got in the canoe. They pulled the ladder in after them, so he started with his drum, singing the song of the Tlumach, the rain. Pretty soon, Tlumach started coming. And it rained and it rained and it rained. Day in and day out, it kept raining. Every once in a while, they'd go and they'd look over the top of their canoe roof. They could see the water down here was starting to come up, flooding, coming toward the mountain. It kept flooding and it kept coming toward Comaqualshan. And they were right beside it. They were in a place called Wells Creek. When the water started getting way up there, the young people came and they wanted to get in. And the old man told the people that was already in the canoe, plug your ears, don't listen to them. These people would be real bad to bring with us into the new world because they don't know how to mix their hearts with ours. And we can't have that kind of disruption with us. So it's up to them to find their own way through this flood. So we, the true people, will be in this big canoe. So when the water started getting up close to them, he told everybody, walk to the bow of the canoe. Everybody walked to the bow of the canoe, and the canoe tipped and it slid down the mountain. When it started sliding down the mountain, it started pulling the ropes from all over the mountain. And it pulled the other whaling canoes behind it. As they slid down off the mountain, they made these gorges coming down off that mountain. That's where all the creeks are at now, where those canoes all slid behind the big canoe. They slid down the mountain, went down through the valley, cutting a big gorge from the weight of that canoe into the salt water. They landed in the salt water and all the little canoes behind them. Pretty soon that water came and it covered all of the mountain. No more land was visible. They drifted out on the big water for days and days and days. While drifting out there, they lived off from the smoked salmon in the water that they gathered. They drifted and drifted along for a long, long time. One day they looked and they could see land appearing. So everybody got down the great big oars and he started rowing that big giant canoe. They got to the land, it was the tip of a mountain. He said, there's not enough land here for all of us. Get in your whaling canoes. Take some animals and take some bushes and stuff with you and plants. And when you get to where you're going, catch the Cha-das-ska-dum, the salmon, and take his carcass and put it on Mother Earth and put the plants on top of his body. And he'll nourish them back to life again and bring life back to the medicine people, the plants. Take some of these animals with you, and when you get to where you're going, put some of this magic dust on them and wake them back up. But you're not to eat them until they multiply. So everybody got in their whaling canoes and they went off different directions. He said, before you leave, so we know who we are. So we know that we're the people who survived off this big canoe. That we are here from here. We didn't come across no land bridge. So to know this, we're going to put Ish on the end of our name. He's because we lived off from the fish all the time we've been out here. To honor the fish, we're going to name ourselves Ish on the end of our name. So we, the people of this land, will be called the Tlakamish. Down south of us, Swinamish, Dwamish, Skykomish, and all the tribes of the Ish on the end were the ones who were survivors of the big canoe. So they all paddled off in different directions in their whaling canoes. As they were paddling off, they all waved goodbye to one another and they went out of sight. Some of them took the wolf and the grizzly with them. Some of them took the mule deer and the mountain goats. Some took the rams and different moose and different things. They went all different directions. So our people, they stayed here and the water kept receding and they kept on following the water down till it got down to where we are at now. Then the water quit going out anymore. They established a new village, Tlakamish village, called Salish. The Salish people are all those ones that lived on that big boat, the big canoe. Salish, the people who lived off from the fish. They got to their main village, the Coast Salish people of the Tlakamish tribe. And at the mouth of the river, they set up their village. And the fish were coming, and they're eating fish. They brought the animals up in the mountain, and they put the magic dust on them. And they brought them back awake again. They took the carcasses of the Cha-das-ska and they put it on Mother Earth, and they put the plants on it. And the berries and the ferns and all the things start growing off from the fertilization of the carcass. Everything was looking good, and he told his people, you're not to touch any of these animals until they multiply and become enough for all of us. Not to hunt them, that we'll live off from the fish. So everything was going real good. Then one day the young people went down by the river. They were standing by the river and there's fish, 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 fried fish, wind-dried fish, smoked fish, baked fish, fried fish, 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 fish. I'm sick and tired of fish. And the mother of all the salmon was laying out there, salmon woman. She heard the young people and it hurt her feelings really bad. So she gathered all of her children and she went out into the big water. The people went to the river to catch fish to eat, and there was none. The young people started crying. They said, "We were complaining about the fish, and they must have heard us," and they left. So they went to the old man, and they said, "Could you go out and ask Salmon woman to bring her children back?" He said, "I'm too old." He said, "I'd never survive out on the big water again." He said, "I'll send my eldest son from my first wife." So he called him to his house. He told the people in the village, "Gather what food you've got and put it in his canoe. Make some watertight baskets and put fresh water in his canoe." He told his oldest boys, "You travel out into the big water and find Salmon woman and bring her back." So away he went. He paddled out what's now known as the San Juan Islands. He paddled amongst and through them. He got out on the big water. Still no sign of Salmon woman. Pretty soon, Spachman set in, the fog. Got real foggy and he got lost. He kept paddling and paddling for days. He didn't know if it was day or night. It was so foggy. He was feeling really bad that he was eating up his food and drinking his water, and he didn't find Salmon woman. And even if he did, he wouldn't even know which way home was. He was feeling really bad. He was letting his people down. After all, he ran out of food and he ran out of water. And he started starving to death. He was getting very, very weak. He went to the bow of his canoe and he stood there and he put his hands up. And he started singing his death song. And right in the middle of his song, he could hear a woman's voice hollering for help. Someplace in the fog, he could hear this lady hollering for help. He took his paddle and he paddled in the direction of the voice. He come up on this beautiful woman floating in the water. He grabbed her in the last of his strength. He pulled her aboard his canoe. When he got her aboard the canoe, she thanked him for saving her. He apologized. He said, "All I did was save you from one death, bringing you to a canoe to the other." She said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I have no food. I have no water. And even if I did, I have no idea where I am. I'm lost." She said, and she said, "Take off your yashikwan." He took off his cedar hat. She said, "Dip it into the water." He dipped it in, and there was her children, the salmon. She said, "I am Salmon woman. She said, I've transformed myself to human flesh so that you could see and talk with me. I brought my children out here because your people were complaining that they didn't like the fish no more. So that's why I'm out here with my children, and I'm not going back." He begged her, "If you come back, we'll treat you different and we'll honor you all the time." She didn't know if she would like to do that or not. So she said, "Take some of my salmon and clean them." So he took some of her children out of his hat, his yashikwan. She took the seats out of his canoe and she broke them and she made a little fire in the middle of his canoe. And she cooked the salmon on a stick and they ate. It started to rain and they caught water in their canoe and they drank. He said, "I have my strength back," but I don't know how to get home. How will I find my way back? She said, "I will go back to your village with you. But you've got to treat my kids good." He said, "But I don't know how to find my village." She said, "My children, no, let them go. Dump them back in the water. And when they start going to your river, they'll jump. They'll jump, and when they jump out there, you follow them. They're going to the river. So they'll jump and they'll show you which way the river is." So he dumped them back in, and they start jumping. And he started paddling, and he'd follow them. The fish would jump, and they'd go under, and they'd swim, and they'd come up, and they'd jump. And he kept paddling along, following them. First he could see land ahead. First he recognized the San Juan Islands. He said, "I know this is my backyard. I know where I'm at." He paddled along. First he come in the mouth of the river, and the salmon were ahead of him, jumping, going into the river. The people of the village, the Blackfish village, were so happy to see the salmon, and so happy to see this young leader coming back, but they were puzzled. Who was this woman that he had with her? He pulled in the shore with his canoe, and he took Salmon woman. He brought her ashore. He told his father, he said, "This is Salmon woman. I've asked her to be my wife." She agreed to marry me, and she said the only time we can touch her children is when they're coming through the mouth of the river. You're not to bother them once they go past here. Once they go up above into the ground where they're going to sleep, You guys call the spawning bed. You're not to go up there and bother them, for they're going to go up there and sleep and have their babies. Everybody agreed that they'd do that. So everything was good again. They had food once more, and everybody was happy. Then pretty soon the old man came down and he told the people, the animals have multiplied. You can go to the mountain and hunt. Everybody was so happy because they'd been so long without deer meat, elk meat, bear and beaver, all the different kinds of foods they were used to eating before the big flood. So they traveled and they went up into the mountain. The younger brother came over and he said, my wife is pregnant, I cannot hunt. He asked the older brothers, would you go to the mountain and hunt for me and my family? He said, yes, I'll do that. So he went up the mountain and he was hunting. The younger brother's family, his kids were crying because they were starving. And he's not supposed to touch nothing while his wife is pregnant, because she's in the sacred place where she's at there and carrying a newborn child. So he's not supposed to be touching his hunting gear or fishing gear. So one day he took off and he snuck up the headwaters of the river. There were the salmon all sleeping. He got down on his hands and knees and he crawled out and he grabbed the king salmon and threw it up on the bank while it was asleep. When he did that, all the rest of the kings rolled over and died and started drifting downstream. The people of the village looked out in the river and they seen the salmon floating belly up, and they all started wailing and crying. Pretty soon he reached out and he grabbed a silver salmon. And all of its kind rolled over and they floated downstream. He reached over, he touched the humpies, and they all rolled over. He touched the dog salmon, they rolled over and they died. Pretty soon everybody come back from the village, from the mountain with their game, to find all their older people, young people and women crying. The older brother said, what's wrong? They said, look in the river. Salmon woman is very angry, her children are dying. She's going to gather them up and she's never going to come back. He went to his home, he talked to Salmon woman, he said, what's happening? She said, somebody is disturbing the place where my children sleep. You promised they would never do that. He said, don't leave, he said, let me go and see. So him and the village and his wife, Salmon woman, all went up. They got up and his younger brother was down on his hands and knees catching the fish. He said, come on everybody, the fish are easy to catch when they're asleep. Salmon woman said, I'm leaving unless you punish him severely. If you don't punish him severely, you'll never see me again. He was just reaching for the steelhead. The older brother said, don't touch him. He said, why not? He said, everything that you touch, all their kind die. Do not touch the steelhead, or he'll be like that too. So he didn't touch the steelhead, and that's how come they can go in and out and never die. They keep coming in and out having their babies. He never touched them. Salmon woman said, if you punish your brother, I will stay, but you got to give him severe punishment. The older brother sat there a long time, and he knelt down on the ground, he laid his medicine bag in front of him, and he prayed. He prayed to Grandfather Sky, he prayed to Mother Earth. He talked to his aunts and uncles, the clouds, the thunder and the lightning. He asked with all sincerity, what can I do to my family, my youngest of my father, my younger brother? What can I do? I don't want to kill him. I feel bad that I have to punish my brother for what he's doing, but he's jeopardized my whole tribe. So he had a vision of what to do, and he reached down and he grabbed the chas, the black paint, the powder. He threw it over his brother, threw the black powder over him. His brother turned all black, and his hair started to grow. The long black hair all over him. His front hands turned to paws, and his feet turned to paws. And he got ears on top of his head, and his nose grew long. He said, from this day forward, your name is Chutquin. You're the black bear. You're never allowed in my village again. I'll fix your tongue so you can never speak to us again. If you come to my village, we'll kill you and we'll eat you. You and your kind, you have to stay up here. When the salmon come back home and have their babies and roll over and die, you can have them. That's why you'll find the bear up in the spawning bed. That's where he goes to eat to this very day. Salmon woman said, I will stay. But you've got to honor my children. From now on, my children will never be in the river all at the same time. I'm going to send my children out into the sea. Dog salmon will come in all by themselves. The kings will come in by themselves, the silvers by themselves, and so on and so forth, so that they're never all in the river at once where anybody can hurt them all again. So all of her children went out into the big water, and every 4 years they come back. But the cycle is so that there's always fish coming into the river. She said you can take fish only at the mouth of the river. If anybody goes to the spawning beds, I'll take my children and I'll never come back. The people all agreed that that'll never happen again. They promised her, please don't leave us. So they went down in the springtime, when the first king come back, they went down and they caught the very first one. They said, in honor of this time of year, we'll call him the spring salmon. And they took all the flesh off from him. They left his head and his backbone and his tail attached. And the inside, his guts were still in there. They took and they made a bed of ferns and cedar boughs. And they put it on some limbs and they wove them. And they put his body on there and they brought him up and they stripped him of his flesh. They brought his body back and they put him into the river with his head pointing upstream, so that when his ancestors, the little children, come behind him, they'd always know which way to go home. And that's called the first salmon ceremony. That fish is pointed upstream, so that the rest of the fish will always find their way back to where they come from. You know, this very day we still practice the first salmon ceremony. And no longer do our children ever complain about the fish that they have, whatever they have on their tables. They have to be humble and eat whatever it is that people put there. And that's how we got the medicine plants back, by putting them on the salmon's carcasses. And that's how the bear become what he is. And that's how come all the people become the Ish people. And why they call us the Coast Salish people. So this is the story of how we come about, part of the creation myth. And that's why if you go up to Wells Creek today and look, you'll see that big gorge where that canoe slid down the mountain, making Wells Creek, and all the little creeks that dump in with it, or where the big canoes slid off the mountain behind it, the whaling canoes, leaving their little trails behind, and the creeks now run into it. And they all do the same thing as the big canoe did. They all come down to the big water, and they come down and they feed the river that's the spawning bed of the salmon, to take care of the salmon woman children. Ah, tiam, nishala, tiam, ko.